The summer of 1789 arrived in Charleston with the weight of wet wool, pressing down on the city until even breathing felt like labor. Along the Cooper River, the air hung thick with salt and rot, and the grand houses of the Battery stood like white monuments to wealth built on suffering. Behind their columned facades, in kitchens and quarters hidden from polite view, hundreds of enslaved souls moved through their days like ghosts in someone else's dream. Sarah worked in the wash house of the Wentworth plantation, 3 miles north of the city proper. Her hands, scarred from lye and scalding water, moved with the rhythm of a woman who had long ago surrendered surprise. She was 24 years old and looked 40. Her son Abel was 5, and he terrified her, not in the way a mother fears for her child's safety, though God knew she had reason enough for that. No. Sarah feared what lived behind her son's eyes. That strange, ancient intelligence that watched the world, with the patience of something that had seen it all before. It was a Tuesday morning when Master Edmund Wentworth first noticed the boy. Sarah had brought Abel to the main house, as she sometimes did when there was no one to mind him in the quarters. She'd settled him in the corner of the kitchen with strict instructions to stay silent and invisible, the only way a slave child survived in the master's house. But Abel had wandered. Tell me in the comments which country you are from and what you thought of this story. And if this story made an impression on you, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any future stories. Master Wentworth found him in the study, standing before the tall case clock that had sat broken for 3 months. The boy's small fingers moved across the exposed mechanism with the certainty of a watchmaker twice his age. As Wentworth watched from the doorway, frozen in disbelief, Abel adjusted something deep within the clock's brass innards. The mechanism clicked, the pendulum swung, time resumed its march. "Boy!" Wentworth's voice cracked like a whip in the quiet room. "Who taught you that?" Abel turned slowly. His eyes were too calm, too knowing for a child who should have been cowering. "Nobody taught me, sir. I just saw how it wanted to move." Sarah appeared behind the master, her face drained of color. She grabbed Abel's arm hard enough to bruise. "I'm sorry, Master Wentworth. I'm so sorry. He didn't mean no harm." But Wentworth raised a hand to silence her. He was staring at Abel with an expression Sarah had never seen on his face before. It wasn't anger. It was something closer to hunger. "How old is this child?" "5 years, sir. Just turned 5 last month." "And he's yours?" "Yes, sir. My Abel." Wentworth crouched down to the boy's level, his expensive coat brushing the floor. "Can you read, boy?" Abel hesitated. Sarah's grip on his arm tightened, a warning. But the truth was already written in his eyes. "Yes, sir." "Show me." Wentworth pulled a leather-bound Bible from his desk and opened it at random. He held it before Abel, pointing to a passage from Psalms. The boy's eyes moved across the page, and then he spoke in a clear, steady voice. "The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul." "Enough." Wentworth stood abruptly, his face flushed. "Sarah, go back to your work. Leave the boy." "Sir, please." "I said go." Sarah's eyes met her son's for one terrible moment. Then she bowed her head and left, her heart hammering against her ribs like a bird trapped in a cage. That night, in the quarters, Sarah held Abel close and wept. Around them, the other slaves spoke in hushed tones about what it meant when the master took an interest in a child. Nothing good ever came of it. Nothing good ever could. "Mama," Abel whispered against her shoulder, "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to make trouble." "I know, baby. I know." She stroked his hair, feeling the fever heat of his skin. Abel always ran hot, as if something burned inside him that ordinary bodies could not contain. "But you got to be more careful. You got to hide what you can do. White folks don't like seeing slaves who know too much." "But why, Mama, if I can help?" "Because it scares them, Abel. And scared white folks are dangerous white folks." She pulled back to look at him, her hands framing his small face. You listening to me?" "Yes, Mama." But even as he said it, Sarah knew he didn't truly understand. How could he? Abel saw the world differently than everyone else. He saw patterns where others saw chaos, connections where others saw coincidence. He was 5 years old, and he understood things that made grown men feel small and stupid. The next morning, Master Wentworth summoned Abel to his study again. This time he had company, Reverend Thaddeus Cole from St. Philip's Church, a thin man with wire-frame spectacles and the severe expression of someone perpetually disappointed by humanity. "Test him," Wentworth said, gesturing to the boy. "I want to know if what I saw yesterday was luck or something more." For the next hour, Reverend Cole subjected Abel to an examination that would have challenged most adult scholars. He asked the boy to read from Latin texts, solve arithmetic problems, recite passages from Scripture. With each correct answer, the Reverend's face grew more pinched, more troubled. Finally, he set down his papers and turned to Wentworth. "Where did you get this child?" "He was born here. His mother's one of my washerwomen." "And his father?" "Dead. Field hand, who took fever 3 years back." Reverend Cole looked at Abel with something approaching revulsion. "This is unnatural, Edmund. No child, especially not a Negro child, should possess such faculties. It's an affront to the natural order God established. Natural or not, he's valuable." Wentworth lit a cigar, his eyes gleaming. "Think of it, Thaddeus, a slave who can read, write, calculate. I could hire him out as a clerk, a tutor, a copyist. The money he could generate, the scandal he could generate, you mean?" Cole stood abruptly. "If word spreads that you're allowing a slave child to read, to demonstrate intelligence that rivals white men, you'll have every abolitionist in the North using him as proof of their arguments. And you'll have every planter in the South questioning why their slaves shouldn't be educated too. So what would you have me do? Waste this gift?" "Gift?" Cole's voice rose. "This is no gift, Edmund. This is a test, a temptation. The devil works in mysterious ways, and sometimes he wears an innocent face." He pointed at Abel, who stood silent and still throughout the exchange. "That child is an abomination. Mark my words, no good will come of this." After the Reverend left, Wentworth sat in silence, smoking his cigar and studying Abel with calculating eyes. Finally, he spoke. "Boy, do you know what you are?" "A slave, sir." "Yes. And do you know what that means?" "It means I belong to you, sir." "That's right. You belong to me. Your body, your mind, everything you are and everything you can do, it's all mine." Wentworth leaned forward. "I'm going to make you useful, boy. I'm going to show the world what proper management can achieve. But you listen carefully. If you ever use that mind of yours against me, if you ever forget your place, I'll sell your mother to the deepest plantation in Georgia, where the life expectancy is 5 years. Do you understand?" Abel's face remained expressionless, but something flickered in his eyes, something dark and old and utterly alien to childhood. "Yes, sir. I understand." Over the following weeks, Wentworth transformed a storage room off the main house into what he called the boys' quarters, though it was really just a cell with a cot and a small desk. He brought books, instruments, puzzles. He wanted to see the limits of Abel's mind, to catalogue and measure his abilities like a naturalist studying a rare specimen. Abel absorbed everything. He mastered geometry in 3 days. He taught himself French from a grammar book. He repaired every broken clock in the house, and then began designing improvements to their mechanisms, drawing detailed schematics that made the city's best watchmaker weep with frustration. News spread quickly through Charleston's elite circles. The Wentworth boy became a topic of conversation at dinner parties and church gatherings. Some called him a miracle, others called him a fraud. A few, like Reverend Cole, called him something darker. One evening, As summer gave way to autumn, a group of physicians arrived at the plantation. They'd come from London, summoned by letters from curious scholars who'd heard impossible stories about a slave child with the mind of a prodigy. They wanted to study Abel, to measure him, to understand how such intelligence could exist in a body that science said should be inferior. Dr. William Cartwright, the eldest of the group, examined Abel with the detached fascination of a man dissecting an interesting corpse. He measured the boy's skull with calipers, noting dimensions in a leather journal. He tested Abel's reflexes, his eyesight, his memory. He asked increasingly complex questions, trying to find the boundary of the boy's knowledge. He never found it. "Remarkable," Cartwright muttered, writing frantically. "The cranial capacity suggests, but that's impossible. The frontal lobe development in a Negro child, it contradicts everything we know about racial hierarchies." Late into the night, the physicians debated theories. Some suggested Abel was a unique mutation, a statistical anomaly. Others proposed he'd been switched at birth, that he was really the mixed-race child of some white scholar. A few, after too much brandy, whispered about supernatural explanations, about African magic or demonic possession. Abel listened to it all from his cell, his expression unreadable. In the quarters, Sarah hadn't seen her son in days. She'd tried to visit, but the overseer had turned her away. Master Wentworth didn't want any primitive influences interfering with his valuable specimen. So she waited and prayed and felt her heart breaking a little more each day. On the 7th night of the physician's stay, something changed. A storm rolled in from the Atlantic, bringing wind that howled like wounded animals and rain that fell in sheets thick enough to drown in. Lightning split the sky in patterns that seemed almost deliberate, almost intelligent. In his cell, Abel stood at the small window, watching the storm with ancient eyes. He raised one hand, fingers tracing symbols in the air that glowed faint blue before fading. Outside, the lightning responded, striking in rhythm with his movements. "What I know," he whispered to the darkness, "I did not learn from you." The lock on his door clicked open, though no key had turned. The chains that Wentworth had insisted on, just a precaution, fell away, the metal parting like water. Abel walked out of his cell and through the sleeping house, leaving no trace except for those words carved into the wooden floor of his room, burned there by something that was definitely not human hands. By morning, he was gone. The physicians found the empty cell and the impossible message and began writing their reports with trembling hands, knowing no journal would publish what they'd witnessed. 3 weeks later, the Wentworth plantation burned. It started in Abel's old cell, a blue flame that consumed everything but left the message on the floor untouched. By dawn, the main house was ash, and Master Edmund Wentworth was a broken man, babbling about blue fire and demon children. Sarah disappeared that same night. Some said she'd run north. Others claimed they'd seen her walking into the woods with a small figure beside her, both of them glowing with that same impossible blue light. Charleston tried to forget about Abel. But on storm nights, when lightning danced over the harbour, fishermen reported seeing symbols traced in the wet sand, mathematical formulas and geometric patterns that no scholar could decipher, written in a child's hand and washed away with the morning tide. They called him a slave, they called him a genius, they called him impossible, but Abel had always known what he really was. And soon, Charleston would learn that some questions are better left unasked, and some chains were never meant to hold what they tried to bind. The story was just beginning. Winter descended on Charleston like a shroud, bringing with it a cold that seeped into bones and made the enslaved population huddle closer in their drafty quarters. But the chill that gripped the city had nothing to do with temperature. Fear had taken root, spreading through whispered conversations in drawing rooms and anxious sermons from church pulpits. The destruction of the Wentworth plantation had left questions that respectable society desperately wanted answered, and just as desperately wanted forgotten. Dr. William Cartwright had not returned to London. He couldn't. What he'd witnessed in that cell, what he'd measured and documented about the boy called Abel, had shattered every scientific principle he'd built his career upon. Instead, he'd taken residence at the Charleston Library Society, filling notebook after notebook with observations, theories, and increasingly frantic attempts to make sense of the impossible. It was there, surrounded by dusty volumes and the musty smell of old paper, that he received visitors on a grey January morning. 3 men: Dr. Samuel Pritchard, a surgeon from Philadelphia known for his work on anatomy, Professor James Whitmore, a natural philosopher from Harvard College, and Reverend Thaddeus Cole, who had appointed himself the spiritual guardian against whatever darkness Abel represented. "Gentlemen," Cartwright said, gesturing to chairs around a cluttered table, "I assume you've come because you've heard the stories." "Stories," Pritchard snorted. He was a thick-bodied man with hands scarred from years of cutting into flesh. "Half of Charleston is convinced we witnessed witchcraft. The other half thinks we participated in some elaborate hoax. My reputation is in ruins, Cartwright." "As is mine," Whitmore added quietly. He was younger, with the idealistic eyes of someone who still believed reason could explain everything. "But I didn't travel 300 miles just to complain. I came because I need to understand what we saw." "That child was no child," Cole interrupted, his voice sharp. "I tried to warn Edmund Wentworth, but greed blinded him. Now he sits in his sister's house, barely coherent, drawing those symbols over and over on every surface. His mind is gone, gentlemen, destroyed by trafficking with forces beyond human comprehension." Cartwright spread papers across the table, his measurements, his notes, sketches of Abel's face from different angles. "I don't believe in demons, Reverend. I believe in observable phenomena. And what I observed was a human child with cognitive abilities that exceed anything in medical literature. The question isn't whether Abel is supernatural, it's how such development is possible within the known laws of nature." "Then explain the fire," Cole demanded. "Explain how a locked room, guarded by 3 men, could be found empty in the morning with no sign of forced exit. Explain the message burned into the floor by no earthly flame." "I can't." "Not yet." Cartwright's admission hung heavy in the air. "But I refuse to attribute to magic what might be explained by science we don't yet understand." Pritchard leaned forward, studying the sketches. "The cranial measurements you recorded, they're consistent with European specimens, not Negro. How do you account for that?" "I can't. That's what troubles me most." Cartwright pulled out another notebook, this one filled with dense text. "I've been researching hereditary traits, studying bloodlines. Abel's mother, Sarah, was reportedly the daughter of a field hand and a house slave. Nothing in her lineage suggests unusual intelligence. His father died before I could examine him, but by all accounts he was an ordinary laborer." "Perhaps the mother lied," Whitmore suggested. "Perhaps the real father was white, a tutor, or even Wentworth himself." "I considered that. But it doesn't explain the totality of Abel's abilities. This wasn't just intelligence, gentlemen. The boy could predict weather patterns, recall entire books after a single reading, understand complex mathematics without instruction. He fixed a clock by intuition, not education. That's not learned behavior. That's something fundamental to his nature." Cole stood abruptly, pacing to the window. Outside, Charleston went about its business, but even from here he could feel the unease. Fewer slaves were seen on the streets. More patrols walked the roads at night. Everyone was waiting for something to happen. "I've consulted with my colleagues in the church," Cole said. "There are historical precedents for this, cases of unnatural knowledge, of beings who appear human but possess abilities beyond mortality. The medieval scholars called them changelings, demons spawn left in place of human children." "Medieval superstition," Cartwright muttered. "Is it? Then explain this." Cole pulled a letter from his coat. "I received this from a priest in Haiti, Father Duchamp. He says there are stories among the slaves there of children born with old souls, carrying knowledge from Africa that predates their arrival in chains. They call them rememberers, children who recall things they should not know, who carry memories that aren't their own." Pritchard laughed, but it sounded forced. "You're suggesting what exactly? That this boy is possessed by ancestral spirits?" "I'm suggesting that there are forces in this world that your science cannot measure, Doctor. Forces that survive the Middle Passage, that resist our chains and our attempts to break them." Cole's eyes were hard. "Abel is not alone. If Father Duchamp is correct, there are others. Children scattered across plantations throughout the South, all born with impossible knowledge, all dangerous." The room fell silent. Outside, church bells marked the hour. Noon, the sound echoing across the city like a warning. Whitmore broke the silence. "Whether supernatural or natural, the boy poses a significant problem. If his abilities become widely known, if abolitionists use him as proof that Negroes are intellectually equal to whites, the entire foundation of our economy crumbles," Pritchard finished. "You can't enslave a people you've admitted are your equals. The whole system depends on the belief in natural hierarchy, in white supremacy as scientific fact." "Exactly." Whitmore pulled out his own notes. "I've been in correspondence with colleagues in Virginia and Georgia. They're all experiencing the same anxiety. The slave population is growing, and with it the fear of rebellion. A figure like Abel, a Negro child who demonstrates intelligence superior to his masters, he becomes a symbol. A rallying point." Cartwright rubbed his temples, feeling a headache building. "So what are you proposing? That we suppress our findings? Pretend we never saw what we saw?" "I'm proposing we find him," Pritchard said flatly. "We find Abel, and we study him properly. Controlled conditions, away from public view. We determine the source of his abilities and whether they can be replicated or eliminated. Then we decide what to do with the information. And if we can't find him, then we find others like him." Pritchard stood, gathering his coat. "Cole says there are more. We locate them, document them, understand them. Knowledge is power, gentlemen. Right now we're powerless because we don't understand what we're dealing with." Cole moved away from the window, his face troubled. "And if what we're dealing with truly is beyond natural law, if these children are harbingers of something darker, then we'll cross that bridge when we come to it," Cartwright said, though his voice lacked conviction. "First things first, we need to organize a proper investigation, form a committee, pool our resources." Over the next week, the four men worked in secret, reaching out to trusted colleagues across the colonies. They called themselves the Committee for the Study of Exceptional Specimens, though in private correspondence they used a different name: the Watchers. Their mission was simple in theory, impossible in practice: identify and study children like Abel, determine the nature of their abilities, and most importantly, prevent their existence from destabilizing the social order that made men like them wealthy and powerful. They established protocols. Any plantation reporting unusual behavior in slave children would be quietly investigated. Owners would be compensated for providing access to exceptional specimens. All findings would be kept confidential, shared only among committee members. By late January, they'd received their first reports. A girl in Georgia who could heal wounds by touch. A boy in Virginia who spoke languages he'd never heard. Twin sisters in North Carolina who communicated without words, knowing each other's thoughts across distances. The committee dispatched observers to each location, armed with measuring tools and careful instructions. Document everything, disturb nothing. Above all, maintain secrecy. But as winter deepened and reports multiplied, a disturbing pattern emerged. None of the children could be held for long. Like Abel, they had a way of disappearing, locks opening, chains breaking, guards falling into inexplicable sleep. They left no traces except questions and the growing fear among slaveholders that the people they'd tried to reduce to property might be something far more dangerous. In Charleston, Dr. Cartwright worked late into the nights, comparing reports, searching for common factors. All the exceptional children were under 10 years old. All had mothers who'd been born in Africa or were children of African-born slaves, and all demonstrated abilities that defied rational explanation. One night, exhausted and frustrated, Cartwright fell asleep at his desk. He dreamed of Africa, a continent he'd never visited, of great kingdoms and libraries filled with knowledge older than Europe's civilization. He dreamed of scholars who read the stars and understood the language of growing things, of healers who saw disease as spiritual imbalance rather than physical corruption. He dreamed of children being loaded onto ships, their minds already filled with knowledge their captors couldn't imagine. He dreamed of that knowledge being passed down through generations, hiding in bloodlines, waiting for the right vessel to manifest. He woke with a start, finding a figure standing by his window. For one heart-stopping moment, he thought it was Abel, but as his eyes adjusted to the darkness, he saw it was Sarah, Abel's mother. "How did you get in here?" he demanded, reaching for the bell to summon help. "The same way my son left his cell." Sarah's voice was calm, but her eyes held an intensity that made Cartwright freeze. "You're looking for him, for others like him. I'm a scientist. I seek to understand, you seek to control. There's a difference." Sarah moved closer, and Cartwright noticed she wore freedom in her bearing now, no longer hunched and diminished as slaves were taught to be. "You can't control what you don't understand, Doctor, and you'll never understand my son." "Where is he?" "Safe. Beyond your reach and your measurements." Sarah pulled something from her pocket, a small leather pouch. She set it on Cartwright's desk. "This is a gift, a warning too. I don't want your African magic." "It's not magic. It's memory." Sarah opened the pouch, revealing a powder that glowed faintly blue in the darkness. "This is ground baobab bark, harvested under a full moon in a land your people call dark, because you fear what you can't conquer. My grandmother taught me its use before she died, passing down knowledge that survived the ships and the whips and the chains." She sprinkled some of the powder on Cartwright's notes. The papers began to smoke, but instead of burning, they transformed. The English words rearranging themselves into symbols he couldn't read, geometric patterns that hurt his eyes to look at. "What have you done?" Cartwright gasped. "Shown you the truth. The knowledge you seek isn't in measurements and dissections. It's in memory, the memory my people carry in our blood, in our bones. Abel isn't special because of some mutation or divine intervention. He's special because he remembers what we all forgot when they tried to make us forget we were human." The powder's glow faded, and the papers returned to normal. But Cartwright knew what he'd seen was real as Abel's empty cell and the blue flame that had consumed Wentworth's plantation. "Your committee will fail," Sarah continued. "You'll find others like my son, but you won't be able to hold them, study them, or break them. They're waking up, Doctor. All across this land of chains, children are remembering who they were before you stole them. And when enough of them wake up, when enough of them remember—" She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. "Where will you go?" Cartwright asked quietly. "North. Maybe further. Somewhere Abel can grow without being measured and tested like an animal." Sarah moved toward the window. "A piece of advice, Doctor. Stop looking for answers in your books and your tools. The truth you seek is in the people you've spent your life trying to prove are less than human. We remember what you've forgotten, that knowledge isn't owned, it's shared. That wisdom isn't contained in pale skin or the right accent." "Wait," Cartwright stood, moving toward her. "If what you're saying is true, if there are more children like Abel, this could change everything. The abolitionists could use this as proof that we deserve to be free." Sarah's laugh was bitter. "We don't need to prove we're geniuses to deserve freedom, Doctor. We deserve it because we're human. But since you need proof, since you need your exceptional specimens to convince you—" She paused at the window. "Watch the children. Watch what they become when you stop trying to chain them." She disappeared into the night, leaving Cartwright alone with his transformed notes and the growing realization that the committee had made a terrible mistake. They'd assumed Abel was an anomaly, a single exceptional case to be studied and understood. But what if he wasn't alone? What if across every plantation in the South, children were waking up, remembering, becoming something that slavery had tried to bury but never quite killed? The next morning, Cartwright burned his notes. He told the committee he could no longer participate in their work, citing deteriorating health. Pritchard called him a coward. Whitmore begged him to reconsider. Cole simply nodded, as if he'd expected this outcome all along. "You've seen something," Cole said, "something that frightened you more than the boy did." "I've seen the future," Cartwright replied, "and it doesn't belong to men like us." He left Charleston that week, returning to London, where he spent the remaining years of his life studying African history and culture. His colleagues thought the experience in South Carolina had driven him mad. Perhaps it had. But sometimes, on quiet nights, he'd take out that leather pouch Sarah had given him and stare at the blue powder inside, wondering what other knowledge had survived the Middle Passage, what other memories were waiting to wake up. In Charleston, the committee continued its work without him, documenting cases, interviewing witnesses, building a catalogue of exceptional children that grew longer each month. But they never caught one, not a single child. The watchers became the watched, and they never realized it until it was too late. Spring came to the South in 1790, with a violence that matched the growing tension between master and enslaved. The rain fell in torrents that washed away roads and turned fields into swamps. Lightning scarred the sky nightly, and in those flashes, people swore they saw symbols written in light. The same symbols that had appeared in Abel's cell, the same patterns that showed up in sand after storms. Sarah and Abel had traveled north through the winter, moving along routes that didn't appear on any map, guided by people whose names were never spoken aloud. The Underground Railroad, it would later be called, but in 1790 it was just a loose network of brave souls, Quakers, free blacks, and sympathetic whites, who believed that helping people escape slavery was worth risking everything. They arrived in Philadelphia on a March evening, exhausted and hungry. A Quaker woman named Rachel Pemberton took them in, asking no questions, offering only warm soup and a safe place to sleep. Her home was a narrow building on a street where free blacks and poor whites lived side by side, where the boundaries of race were slightly less rigid than in Charleston. "Thee will be safe here," Rachel said in her gentle way, showing them to a small room in the attic. "At least for a time, but Philadelphia has slave catchers too, and spies who watch for runaways." "How long can we stay?" Sarah asked. "As long as thee needs." "But the boy—" Rachel looked at Abel, who sat quietly in a corner, his eyes taking in everything. "He's special, isn't he? I can see it." Sarah's hand instinctively moved to protect her son. "What do you mean?" "Peace, sister. I mean him no harm." Rachel knelt beside Abel, studying him with kind eyes. "I've seen others like him. Not many, but a few. Children who know things they shouldn't, who can do things that seem miraculous. The Lord works in mysterious ways, and perhaps he has given thy son gifts for a purpose. Or perhaps people fear what they don't understand," Sarah replied carefully. "Perhaps both are true." Rachel stood. "There's someone I'd like thee to meet, a man who's been gathering others like thy son, helping them understand their gifts and use them wisely. His name is Ezekiel. He was born a slave in Maryland, but earned his freedom through his master's will. Now he runs a school, secret of course, for exceptional children." Sarah felt her heart quicken. A school. Of sorts. A place where children like Abel can learn without fear, can develop their abilities without being treated as curiosities or threats. Rachel moved toward the door. "I'll send word that thee has arrived. In the meantime, rest. Thee has travelled far, and the journey isn't over yet. After Rachel left, Sarah held Abel close, breathing in the scent of his hair, feeling the familiar heat of his skin. "Are you all right, baby?" "I'm fine, Mama." But his voice carried a weight no 6-year-old should bear. "The people in Charleston, they're still looking for us, aren't they?" "Yes, but we're far away now. They can't reach us here. They can reach us anywhere." Abel pulled back and Sarah saw that ancient look in his eyes again, that knowing that had nothing to do with childhood. "The committee, that's what they call themselves. They're afraid of what I represent, so they're trying to find others like me, to study us, to control us." "How do you know that?" "I just know, Mama, the same way I know that Rachel is telling the truth about Ezekiel, and the same way I know that Charleston will burn again before the year is out." He touched her face with small fingers. "I'm sorry I'm different. I'm sorry I make things difficult." "Don't you ever apologize for who you are," Sarah said fiercely. "You're a miracle, Abel. Maybe you're scary sometimes, maybe you know things that frighten me, but you're my son, and you're perfect exactly as you are." 3 days later, Ezekiel arrived. He was a tall man in his 50s, with silver threading through his hair and scars on his wrists, where shackles had once rubbed flesh raw. He carried himself with the dignity of someone who'd survived hell, and emerged with his humanity intact. He sat with Abel for hours, asking questions, listening to answers, occasionally nodding as if confirming suspicions. Finally, he turned to Sarah. "Your son is what we call a rememberer," Ezekiel explained. "It's not common, but it's not unprecedented either. Throughout our people's history, there have always been individuals who carry ancestral memory, knowledge passed down not through teaching, but through blood, through connection to something older and deeper than any one lifetime." "That sounds like the stories my grandmother told," Sarah said, "about spirits and ancestors watching over us." "It's more than stories. In Africa, before the ships, there were schools dedicated to preserving and transmitting this knowledge. Griots who memorized entire histories, healers who understood plant medicine that your white doctors are only beginning to discover, astronomers who tracked stars with precision that rivals European instruments, mathematicians who developed number systems while Europe was still in the Dark Ages." Ezekiel's eyes grew distant, seeing something beyond the room's walls. "When our people were stolen, the slave traders thought they were taking bodies, labor for their plantations. They didn't realize they were also taking minds filled with knowledge accumulated over thousands of years. Most of that knowledge was beaten out, worked out, bred out over generations, but sometimes, rarely, it manifests in a child like Abel, a vessel who can access what was lost." "Why him?" Sarah asked. "Why my son?" "I don't know. No one does. It might be bloodline. Perhaps your grandmother or great-grandmother carried the gift and it skipped generations. It might be circumstance, some trauma or need that triggered the awakening, or it might simply be random, the universe's way of ensuring knowledge survives even when everything else is destroyed." Abel spoke for the first time since Ezekiel arrived. "There are others like me. I can feel them." "Yes." Ezekiel turned to him. 13 that I know of personally. Probably more scattered across plantations from Virginia to Louisiana. Some have escaped, like you. Others are still in chains, hiding their abilities to survive. My school, if you can call it that, is a refuge for those who make it north, a place where you can learn to control and understand your gifts." "What kind of gifts do they have?" Sarah asked. "Varies. There's a girl named Amma who can read thoughts, not all of them, but enough to know when someone means her harm. A boy named Kofi who understands machines intuitively, like Abel with clocks. Twin girls, Abeni and Adana, who share a consciousness. What one knows, the other knows instantly, regardless of distance." Ezekiel stood, pacing slowly. "Some heal, some predict, some manipulate the natural world in ways that seem impossible. Each one is unique, and each one is in danger." "From the committee," Abel said. "You know about them." I see their intentions. I saw them in Charleston measuring me, trying to reduce what I am to numbers and theories. They're terrified because I prove that everything they believe about racial hierarchy is a lie. Ezekiel smiled grimly. Smart boy. Yes, the committee is a threat, but they're not the only one. There are also slave catchers who've heard rumors of valuable runaways with special abilities. There are plantation owners who want to exploit those abilities for profit. And there are religious zealots like Reverend Cole who believe children like you are demonic. So what do? Sarah asked. We build a network. We find the others before the committee does. We teach them to hide their gifts when necessary and use them when safe. We create a community where being exceptional doesn't mean being hunted. Ezekiel looked at Abel, and we prepare for the day when there are enough of us to change the world. Over the following months, Abel joined Ezekiel's school, a loose collection of safe houses and meeting places scattered across Philadelphia. He met other rememberers, children who'd endured similar awakenings and escapes. They shared stories, compared abilities, and slowly learned they weren't alone in their strangeness. Amma, the girl who could read thoughts, was 12 and had escaped from a Virginia plantation after her master tried to use her ability to spy on his neighbors. She was quiet, cautious, her mind always reaching out to scan for threats. Kofi, the machine savant, was 8 and had been freed when his master died and left a will granting him liberty. He spent hours taking apart and reassembling anything mechanical, improving designs with an intuitive understanding of physics and engineering. The twins, Abini and Adana, were 10 and had been born on a rice plantation in South Carolina. Their shared consciousness had terrified their overseer, who'd beaten them trying to break their connection. It hadn't worked. They'd escaped together, moving as one person in 2 bodies, never speaking aloud because they didn't need to. There were others too. A boy who could start fires with his mind, a girl who made plants grow with her touch, a teenager who spoke to animals and had them obey. Ezekiel taught them all, not just about their abilities but about history, the real history of Africa that white scholars ignored or distorted. He told them about the kingdom of Kush, which had conquered Egypt, about the University of Sankore in Timbuktu, where scholars studied mathematics and astronomy centuries before European universities existed, about ironworking, agriculture, architecture, art, medicine, all developed by African civilizations that slave traders had dismissed as primitive. They need you to believe you're inferior, Ezekiel said one evening, addressing the children gathered in a warehouse converted to a classroom. They need that belief to justify slavery, to make themselves feel righteous while they commit atrocities. But you, all of you, are living proof that their justifications are lies. You remember what they tried to make us forget. Abel listened and learned, but he also sensed something dark approaching. The committee hadn't given up. They'd expanded their operations, sent agents south to investigate every report of unusual slave children. And they'd become more ruthless, more willing to use violence to secure their specimens. One night, as summer heat pressed down on Philadelphia, Abel woke from a nightmare with his heart racing. In the dream, he'd seen fire. Not the blue flame he sometimes summoned, but red flames of destruction, consuming a house where children screamed behind locked doors. He found Ezekiel sitting by a window, reading by candlelight. Something bad is going to happen, Abel said without preamble. Ezekiel set down his book. Tell me. The committee found one of us, a boy in Baltimore. They took him to a house, locked him in a room to study him. But he panicked, and his gift... Abel closed his eyes, seeing the vision again. He controls heat. When he's scared, he can't control it. The house is going to burn, and he's going to die, and they're going to blame it on slave rebellion. When? 3 days from now. Maybe 4. Ezekiel stood immediately. We have to get him out. How? Baltimore is 2 days' travel, and you said the committee has people watching the roads. Then we'll take routes they don't watch. Gather the others, everyone old enough to help. If the committee has one of us, they're getting ready to move on the rest. We need to act now before they do. Within hours, Ezekiel had assembled a rescue party. Himself, Sarah, 2 Quaker men who'd helped runaways before, and surprisingly, Amma, who insisted her ability to read minds would be crucial. "I can sense guards, know where they're looking when they're distracted," she argued when Ezekiel tried to refuse. "You need me." They traveled south under cover of darkness, moving along back roads and through forests, avoiding main thoroughfares where slave catchers and committee agents might spot them. Amma kept her mind reaching out, scanning for threats, while Abel sat quiet, his consciousness somehow connected to the boy they were trying to save. "His name is Kwame," Abel said on the second night as they camped in dense woods. "He's 9 years old. His mother died last year, and he's been alone ever since. He's so scared, Mama. He doesn't understand why he's different." "We'll get him out," Sarah promised, though she had no idea how. They reached Baltimore late on the 3rd day, locating the house where the committee had established what they euphemistically called a research facility. It was a plain building in a quiet neighborhood, nothing to suggest the horrors being conducted inside. Amma closed her eyes, her mind reaching into the house. 3 guards, 2 downstairs, 1 outside the boys' room. Dr. Pritchard is there too, along with another man I don't recognize. They're planning to move Kwame tomorrow, take him to a bigger facility in Virginia. "Tonight, then," Ezekiel said. "We move tonight." The rescue was planned with desperate precision. The Quaker men would create a distraction at the front of the house, claiming to be lost travelers needing directions. While the guards were occupied, Ezekiel and Sarah would enter through the back, with Amma guiding them telepathically around the remaining guard. Abel would stay outside, ready to intervene if something went wrong. It almost worked. The Quakers played their part perfectly, engaging the front guards in extended conversation. Ezekiel and Sarah slipped through an unlocked kitchen window, moving silently through dark hallways, while Amma's voice whispered in their minds, "Left corridor, second door. Guard is reading, distracted." They reached Kwame's room and found the door locked, but the lock was simple. Ezekiel picked it in seconds, and they slipped inside. Kwame sat in the corner, chained to the wall, his eyes wide with terror. The room was oppressively hot, his gift manifesting through his fear. When he saw strangers, the temperature spiked dangerously. "Peace," Sarah whispered, kneeling before him. "We're here to help. We're like you." "Liars," Kwame sobbed. "Everyone lies. They said they wanted to help. Then they chained me up, hurt me. Kwame." Abel appeared in the doorway, though he was supposed to be outside. He'd felt the boys panic and come running. "Look at me." Their eyes met, and something passed between them, a recognition, a shared understanding of what it meant to be different, to be hunted for abilities they never asked for. Abel raised his hand and blue flame danced across his fingers, not destroying, just existing, proof of kinship. Kwame's fear eased slightly. The room's temperature dropped. "We're going to get you out," Abel said. "But you have to trust us. Can you do that?" Slowly, Kwame nodded. Ezekiel worked on the chains while Sarah kept watch. Outside, Amma's mental voice carried a warning. The guard heard something. "He's coming." The door burst open before they could escape. The guard, a thick man with a pistol, took in the scene and raised his weapon. What happened next occurred in seconds, but felt like hours. The guard fired. Sarah threw herself in front of Kwame. The bullet struck her shoulder, spinning her around. She hit the floor hard, blood spreading across her dress. Abel screamed, and the blue flame erupted from him, not controlled, not measured, but pure rage manifested as fire that wasn't really fire. It struck the guard, and he collapsed, unconscious before his body hit the ground. Kwame's gift responded to the violence, heat surging through the room. Wood began to char, papers caught fire. "We have to go," Ezekiel said, lifting Sarah. "Now!" They fled through the house as flames spread behind them, Kwame's red fire mixing with Abel's blue, creating an inferno that consumed the committee's research facility within minutes. Outside, the Quakers had secured a wagon. They loaded Sarah's wounded body and the terrified Kwame, then raced north as alarm bells rang through Baltimore's streets. Sarah survived the bullet wound, but barely. Rachel Pemberton tended her through fever and infection, using herbs and prayers and sheer stubborn determination to keep her alive. For 3 weeks, she hovered between life and death, while Abel sat by her bedside, his hand holding hers, his gift somehow sharing his strength to keep her tethered to the world. When she finally woke, weak but alive, the first thing she saw was her son's tear-stained face. "You stayed," she whispered. "Always, Mama, always." News of the Baltimore fire spread quickly. The committee claimed it was a slave rebellion, an act of terrorism by violent abolitionists, but rumors circulated about blue flames and a boy with ancient eyes, and people began to wonder what was really happening. In Philadelphia, Ezekiel's network grew stronger. More rememberers arrived, escaping plantations, fleeing persecution, seeking community. They learned to hide their gifts when necessary, use them when safe, and most importantly, support each other. Abel became their symbol, the boy who defied the committee and survived. But he never forgot the cost. His mother's blood, Kwame's terror, the guard's life taken in a moment of rage. His gifts came with responsibility, and he was only beginning to understand what that meant. The committee, however, was far from finished. By autumn of 1790, the Committee for the Study of Exceptional Specimens had abandoned all pretense of scientific objectivity. What had begun as scholarly curiosity had devolved into something darker, a desperate hunt to control or eliminate a threat that challenged the very foundations of their world. Dr. Samuel Pritchard sat in a Philadelphia boarding house, reviewing reports from agents scattered across the South. The Baltimore facility's destruction had cost them months of research and, more importantly, had revealed a coordinated network protecting these exceptional children. Someone was organizing them, teaching them to resist. "We've been too cautious," Pritchard said to his companion, a man named Marcus Holloway. Holloway was new to the committee, a former slave catcher who'd found a more lucrative career hunting unusual runaways. He had dead eyes and a reputation for getting results through methods that made even hardened slavers uncomfortable. "You want me to be less cautious?" Holloway asked, his voice flat. "I can arrange that. I want you to find the boy, Abel. He's the key to all of this. Find him, and we find the network. The Wentworth boy? He's probably dead. That fire in Charleston, he's not dead. I saw what he could do. He didn't die in that fire. He started it." Pritchard pulled out a newspaper clipping. "And I believe he was in Baltimore too. 2 fires, both with witnesses reporting blue flames. That's not coincidence." Holloway studied the clipping. "You're asking me to hunt a child who can create fire with his mind? I'm asking you to do what you're paid to do. Find runaways. This one just happens to be more valuable than most." Pritchard slid a purse across the table. "Triple your usual fee, plus a bonus if you bring him back alive." "And if I can't bring him alive?" Pritchard's silence was answer enough. Meanwhile, in the network of safe houses that Ezekiel had built, life continued with an undercurrent of tension. Everyone knew the committee would retaliate. Everyone knew Baltimore had made them targets. But they also knew they couldn't stop helping rememberers escape. There were too many children still in chains, still suffering, still hiding what they were to survive. Abel, now 7, spent his days learning from Ezekiel and the other children, but he also spent time with his mother, who was slowly recovering from her wound. The bullet had shattered bone, leaving her left arm weak and painful. She couldn't work as she once had. and Abel blamed himself for every wince, every moment of pain he saw across her face. "Stop," Sarah said one afternoon, catching his expression. "I see you carrying guilt like a weight, baby. But I chose to protect Kwame. Nobody made me do that. If I hadn't been different, then I wouldn't have had you, and I'd rather have you and this scar than 1,000 healthy arms without you." She touched his face. "We're at war, Abel. Maybe not with guns and armies yet, but war all the same. In war, people get hurt. That's not your fault. It's the fault of the people who started this fight by putting us in chains. When does it end?" Sarah looked out the window, where Philadelphia's streets bustled with life. Free blacks and enslaved ones, whites who hated slavery and whites who profited from it, all mixed together in uneasy proximity. "I don't know. Maybe never in our lifetime. But every child we save, every person we help escape, that's a victory. Small ones add up." That night, Ezekiel called a meeting of all the rememberers old enough to understand the danger they faced. 15 children gathered in the warehouse classroom, ages 6 to 16, abilities ranging from the subtle to the spectacular. "The committee is escalating," Ezekiel said without preamble. "They've hired Marcus Holloway, a man known for his brutality and effectiveness. He's hunting us specifically, and he will find us eventually. We need to make a decision as a community." "What kind of decision?" asked Kofi, the machine savant. "Whether to scatter or stand together. If we split up, return to hiding our abilities, we might survive individually, but we lose the community, the support system we've built. If we stay together, we're stronger, but we're also a bigger target." "We stay together," Amma said immediately. The other children murmured agreement. "You understand what that means? We're choosing to fight in our own way. We're choosing to be visible, to be a threat they can't ignore." "Good," said Abini. Or was it Adana? With the twins, it was often hard to tell. "Let them see us. Let them be afraid. Fear makes people dangerous," Ezekiel warned. "People are already dangerous to us," Abel pointed out. "At least this way, we're dangerous back." The discussion continued late into the night, and by morning the decision was made. They would stay together, strengthen the network, and actively seek out more rememberers. But they would also take precautions, establish multiple safe houses, create emergency protocols, and most importantly, teach the children not just to hide their abilities, but to use them for protection. Over the following weeks, the safe house transformed into something closer to a fortress. The Quakers helped secure multiple properties, creating a web of locations where children could be moved quickly if one site was compromised. Ima used her telepathy to screen visitors, ensuring no committee agents infiltrated their network. Kofi designed mechanical alarms and locks that would alert them to intrusions. Abel threw himself into training, not just controlling his blue flame, but understanding it. With Ezekiel's guidance, he learned that his fire wasn't really fire at all. It was pure energy, shaped by his will, responding to his emotions. When he was calm, he could use it for light or warmth. When he was angry, it became a weapon. The key was balance, maintaining control, even in crisis. He practiced daily, sometimes alone, sometimes with other children who had destructive gifts. They learned together, pushed each other, developed techniques for restraint and release. It felt like preparing for war, and perhaps it was. Marcus Holloway arrived in Philadelphia in November, as the first snow began to fall. He didn't announce himself or make his presence obvious. He simply began asking questions, in taverns frequented by free blacks, in the markets where slaves bought goods for their masters, in the churches where both races worshipped separately. He was looking for patterns, anomalies. A child who never got sick, a woman whose vegetables grew twice as fast as her neighbors, a man who could predict rain with unsettling accuracy. Small things, easy to dismiss individually, but together they painted a picture of where the rememberers might be hiding. Emma sensed him before he got close. She'd been scanning the city's mental landscape, a habit she'd developed after Baltimore, when she encountered a mind that felt wrong, cold, focused, predatory. "We have a problem," she told Ezekiel. "There's a hunter in the city. Not committee, different, dangerous." "Holloway. I don't know his name, but his thoughts are clear. He's looking for Abel specifically, and he's getting close." They moved Abel that night, taking him to a safe house on the city's outskirts. But Holloway was good at his job. By morning he'd traced connections, followed trails, and identified 3 possible locations where the network operated. He chose the warehouse. He came at dawn, when most of the city still slept, brought 6 men with him, former slave catchers and thugs who didn't ask questions as long as the pay was good. They broke down the warehouse door, expecting to find children asleep, easy targets. Instead, they found a trap. Ezekiel had anticipated this moment, prepared for it. The children weren't in the warehouse, they'd been moved the night before, but several adults from the network were armed and ready. The fight was brief and brutal. Holloway's men had guns and knives. The network had righteous fury and the element of surprise. When the dust settled, 3 of Holloway's men were injured, 1 seriously. Holloway himself had taken a bullet to the leg. But as the network members celebrated their victory, Holloway lay on the warehouse floor and smiled. Because he'd gotten what he came for, confirmation that the network was real, that it would fight back, and most importantly, that it was protecting something valuable. "You should have killed me," he said to Ezekiel, who stood over him with a rifle. "I don't kill unless I have to." "Noble, stupid, but noble," Holloway coughed, blood flecking his lips. "The boy, Abel, he's not here. But he's close, I can feel it. You'll never find him. Maybe not. But the committee will. They're coming, old man, coming with more resources than you can imagine, more determination than you can fight. This little network of yours? It's over. You just don't know it yet." Holloway was arrested by the City Watch, charged with breaking and entering. He'd be out within a week. Men like him always had friends who could post bail. But his words haunted Ezekiel. That night, he gathered the network's leadership in a safe house parlor. Sarah was there, her arm in a sling, but her resolve unshaken. Rachel Pemberton represented the Quakers who'd been supporting them, and several free blacks who'd risked everything to help runaways sat around the table. "Holloway was right," Ezekiel said. "The committee is escalating. Next time, they'll come with legal authority. Warrants, deputies, maybe even military support. We can't fight that." "So what do you propose?" Sarah asked. "We expand. We've been focused on Philadelphia, but there are other cities, New York, Boston, even Canada. We need to spread the network wider, make it harder to target all of us at once." "That means splitting up the children," Rachel said quietly. "Yes. I know that's painful. We've built a community, a family. But keeping them all together makes them vulnerable." Ezekiel looked around the table. "We send the older ones to establish new safe houses in other cities. We train more adults to recognize and help rememberers. We turn this from one network into dozens, all connected but independent." "And Abel?" Sarah's voice was steady, but Ezekiel heard the fear beneath. "Abel is too valuable, too visible. The committee wants him specifically, which means he can't stay in any one place too long." Ezekiel met her eyes. "I'm sorry, Sarah, but you and Abel need to keep moving, at least until this dies down." "It's never going to die down," Sarah said. "Not as long as slavery exists, and children like my son prove that everything slavery is built on is a lie." "I know. But we can still protect them. We can still give them a chance to grow up, to become who they're meant to be." The decision was made. Over the next weeks, the network dismantled and reformed. Older rememberers were sent north and west, accompanied by trusted adults, carrying letters of introduction to Quaker communities and abolitionist circles. Younger children were placed with families who could hide them, teach them to suppress their gifts until it was safe to use them openly. Abel and Sarah prepared to leave Philadelphia, heading to New York. Amma would come with them, Her telepathy made her an ideal early warning system. Kofi would go to Boston with one of the Quaker families. The twins would travel to Canada, where slavery had been abolished, and they might finally be safe. On their last night in Philadelphia, Abel stood on the roof of the safe house, looking out over the city. Ezekiel found him there, watching snow fall through lamplight. "You're thinking about Charleston," Ezekiel said. "I'm thinking about all the children we haven't saved yet, all the ones still in chains, hiding what they are, scared and alone." Abel turned to him. "Is this what my life will be? Always running, always hiding? I hope not. I hope someday you'll live in a world where being extraordinary isn't a crime, where the color of your skin doesn't determine your worth." Ezekiel put a hand on Abel's shoulder. "But that world won't come on its own. It has to be built, and children like you're the foundation." "That's a lot of pressure for a 7-year-old. "I know, and I'm sorry you have to carry it. But I've seen what you can do, Abel. Not just the fire, but the way you inspire others, the way you give them hope. You're going to change the world. The question is whether the world will let you live long enough to do it." They left Philadelphia before dawn, a small group bundled against the cold, carrying everything they owned in bags that could be abandoned if pursuit got too close. Sarah held Abel's hand as they walked toward the docks, where a sympathetic ship captain would take them north. Behind them, in a boarding house across the city, Marcus Holloway sat by a window, his leg bandaged, watching the streets with patient eyes. He'd lost this round, but the game was far from over. The committee wanted Abel, and Holloway had never failed to deliver on a contract. He'd find the boy. It was only a matter of time. New York in the winter of 1791 was a city of contrasts. Wealth and poverty lived side by side, sometimes in the same building. Slavery was still legal here, though the movement to abolish it grew stronger each year. Free blacks walked the same streets as enslaved ones, and sometimes it was impossible to tell who was free and who wasn't. Everyone carried the weight of being black in a white man's world. Abel, Sarah, and Amma arrived on a January morning when ice crusted the East River and chimney smoke hung low over the city. They were met by a free black man named Thomas, who ran a small print shop near the docks. He was part of Ezekiel's extended network, though he'd never met any rememberers before. "You'll be safe here," Thomas said, leading them through narrow streets to his shop. "Not comfortable, but safe. I've got a room above the press where you can stay. Keep quiet during business hours and don't show your faces in the windows." The room was small, barely large enough for 2 bedrolls and a trunk, but it was warm, and Thomas was kind, and for the first few weeks it felt like sanctuary. Abel spent his days reading everything he could find in Thomas's shop. The man printed pamphlets, some political, some religious, many arguing against slavery. Abel absorbed them all, learning about the abolitionist movement, about the legal arguments being made in state legislatures, about the growing divide between North and South. "You think they'll ever end it?" Abel asked Thomas one afternoon. "Slavery, I mean." Thomas set down the type he was arranging. "Someday. Has to. Can't build a nation on the idea that all men are created equal while keeping hundreds of thousands in chains. The contradiction will tear this country apart eventually. How long? Maybe decades, maybe longer. Change comes slow, boy, especially when people's money is tied up in keeping things the same." Amma spent her time scanning the city's mental landscape, alert for threats. She'd grown more powerful over the months. Her range had expanded, and she could now read not just surface thoughts, but deeper intentions. It exhausted her, left her with headaches that lasted for days, but she did it anyway. She'd failed to warn them before Holloway found the Philadelphia warehouse. She wouldn't fail again. It was Amma who first sensed the committee's presence in New York. "They're here," she said one evening, her face pale. "Not Holloway. Others. 3 men, maybe 4. They're searching systematically, neighborhood by neighborhood. They know we're in the city. They just don't know where yet." Sarah, who'd been mending a shirt by candlelight, set down her needle. "How long do we have?" "Days. Maybe a week if we're lucky. Then we move again. "We can't keep running forever," Abel said quietly. "Eventually they'll catch us, or we'll run out of places to hide." "What are you suggesting?" Sarah asked, though she already knew. She could see it in her son's eyes, that ancient determination that had nothing to do with being 8 years old. "I'm suggesting we stop running. We face them. We show them that we're not specimens to be studied or threats to be eliminated. We're people, and we're not going away." Thomas, who'd been listening from the doorway, shook his head. "That's suicide, boy. You think the committee will just have a reasonable conversation with you? They'll lock you up, dissect you if they can, use you as proof that slavery is justified because, look, here's a dangerous Negro child who needs to be controlled. Only if they can catch me." Abel stood, blue flame dancing across his fingers. "But what if I don't let them catch me? What if instead I show everyone, not just the committee, but the whole city, what I can do, what we all can do? They'll call you a demon," Amma pointed out, "a witch. They'll use it to justify more violence against our people. Maybe they'll see that we're more than they thought, that we're capable of things they can't explain, can't control, can't reduce to their theories about racial inferiority." Abel's flame grew brighter. "I'm tired of hiding, Mama. I'm tired of pretending to be less than I am, so white people feel comfortable." Sarah moved to her son, placing her hand in the blue flame. "It didn't burn her. It never did. I know you're tired. We all are. But martyrdom won't change anything, baby. It'll just leave me without a son." The debate continued through the night, with Thomas and Sarah arguing for caution, Abel pushing for action, and Amma trying to find middle ground. By dawn, they'd reached a compromise. Abel wouldn't reveal himself publicly, not yet, but he would start using his gifts more openly within the black community, helping where he could, building support among people who might protect them when the committee finally closed in. Over the following weeks, Abel became a ghost story in New York's black neighborhoods. People whispered about a boy who could heal burns with his touch, who made lamps burn without oil, who seemed to know things before they happened. He never stayed anywhere long, never gave his name, but word spread anyway. The committee heard the stories too. Their agents began focusing their search on areas where the boy had been spotted, interviewing witnesses, trying to separate fact from exaggeration. Marcus Holloway also heard the stories. His leg had healed badly. He walked with a limp now, but his determination hadn't diminished. If anything, the Philadelphia failure had made him more obsessed. He'd been tracking the network's movements, following the trail of rememberers that had scattered from Philadelphia to other cities. He arrived in New York in late February, bringing a new strategy. Instead of direct confrontation, he would use bait. His men captured a young rememberer named Joshua, a 9-year-old boy with the ability to sense lies. Joshua had been traveling alone, trying to reach the New York network, when Holloway's men grabbed him off a dock. They took him to a warehouse on the city's outskirts, locked him in a cell and waited. Then Holloway sent word through channels he knew the network monitored. "We have the boy who knows truth. Come for him, or we'll hand him to the committee. You have 3 days." Amma sensed Joshua's presence almost immediately. His fear was like a beacon in her mind. "It's a trap," she said. "Holloway knows we'll try to rescue him, and he'll be waiting." "So we don't rescue him?" Abel asked. "I didn't say that. I said it's a trap, which means we need to spring it carefully." They spent a day planning. Thomas recruited help from the free black community, men who'd fought in the revolution and weren't afraid of violence. Amma mapped the warehouse mentally, identifying guard positions and weak points. Abel prepared himself for what might be his first real battle. Sarah watched her son sharpen his control over the blue flame and felt her heart breaking. He was 8 years old. He should have been playing, learning his letters, helping with chores, normal child things. Instead, he was preparing for war. "I'm sorry," Sarah whispered to the memory of Abel's father, a man who died too young to see his extraordinary son. "I'm sorry I couldn't keep him safe, couldn't give him a normal life." But there was nothing normal about Abel, and there never had been. They struck at midnight on the third day. Thomas and 6 other men attacked the warehouse's front entrance, drawing guards away from Joshua's cell. In the chaos, Abel, Sarah, and Amma slipped through a back window that Kofi had designed to open silently from the outside. They found Joshua in a cell similar to the one Abel had escaped from in Charleston. The boy was chained, terrified, his ability to sense lies making him acutely aware that Holloway's promises of safety were all false. "We're getting you out," Amma whispered while Abel worked on the lock. "He knows you're here," Joshua said. "Holloway, he knew you'd come. He's waiting." As if summoned by the words, Holloway appeared in the doorway, flanked by 4 armed men. His limp was pronounced, but his gun was steady. "The famous Abel," Holloway said. "I was starting to think you were a myth." Abel stood slowly, placing himself between Holloway and Joshua. Blue flame flickered to life in his palms. "Let us go. Nobody else has to get hurt. You hurt my leg. You destroyed committee property. You've been a thorn in everyone's side for 2 years now." Holloway aimed his pistol at Abel's chest. "I've got a lucrative contract to bring you in, but the contract doesn't specify the condition you're delivered in. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to come quietly, or I'm going to shoot your mother in front of you." The gun shifted toward Sarah. Time seemed to slow. Abel could see the hammer beginning to fall, could sense the bullet's path before it fired. His gift surged. Not the controlled flame he'd been practicing, but raw, desperate power. The blue fire exploded from him in a wave that engulfed the entire room. It didn't burn flesh, didn't consume wood or cloth. Instead, it was something else entirely. A force that knocked Holloway and his men unconscious without leaving a mark, that shattered the lock on Joshua's chains, that pulsed with a light too bright to look at directly. When the light faded, Abel collapsed. Sarah caught him, feeling his fever heat, his racing heart. The burst of power had drained him completely. "We have to move," Amma said, checking the unconscious guards. "More will come." And they fled into the night, carrying both Abel and Joshua. Behind them, Thomas and his men melted into the city's shadows, their attack having served its purpose as distraction. By dawn, they'd all regrouped in a new safe house, exhausted but alive. Abel woke 3 days later. His gift had always run hot, but this was different. He'd pushed himself too far, accessed power he didn't know he had. Ezekiel had warned him about this. The stronger a rememberer's ability, the more dangerous it became if used without control. "You could have died," Sarah said, her voice thick with tears. "That power, it almost consumed you. But it didn't, and we saved Joshua." Abel sat up slowly, his body weak but his mind clear. "Mama, I can feel it. Something's changing. Not just with me, but with all of us, all the rememberers. We're getting stronger. Our gifts are growing." "That's not necessarily good news," Amma said from the doorway. "Stronger powers means stronger reactions from people who fear us. The committee will escalate. Holloway will come back with more men. Eventually, someone's going to die. Then we make sure it's not one of ours," Abel said simply. News of the New York incident spread quickly through both the network and the committee. Ezekiel, still in Philadelphia, sent word that more rememberers were manifesting across the South, children waking up to abilities they didn't understand, parents terrified and unsure how to help. The committee was overwhelmed, trying to track dozens of cases simultaneously, but the committee also began changing tactics. Instead of trying to capture rememberers for study, they started lobbying state legislatures to pass laws specifically targeting unnatural abilities in the enslaved population. They argued that these abilities represented a threat to public safety, that children displaying them should be immediately removed from plantations and isolated. Reverend Cole, still a member despite his religious reservations, took a different approach. He began preaching about the rememberers as signs of the end times, claiming their existence proved that slavery had angered God and must be abolished, not out of compassion, but out of fear of divine judgment. Ironically, Cole's sermons probably did more to help the abolitionist cause than anything else. People who didn't care about moral arguments against slavery suddenly cared very much when a respected reverend told them God might destroy America for the sin of keeping exceptional children in chains. By spring of 1791, the situation had reached a critical point. The committee wanted to eliminate the rememberers. Religious leaders wanted to debate their spiritual significance. Abolitionists wanted to use them as proof that slavery was wrong. And slaveholders simply wanted them to disappear so their profitable system could continue undisturbed. Caught in the middle were the rememberers themselves, children who just wanted to live without fear, who wanted to use their gifts without persecution, who wanted to be seen as human beings rather than problems to be solved. Abel, recovering in the New York safe house, made a decision. He couldn't keep running. He couldn't keep hiding. If the world wanted to see what he was capable of, he'd show them, but on his terms, not theirs. "I'm going to write something," he told Sarah one evening. "A letter. To the committee, to the churches, to anyone who'll read it. I'm going to tell them who we are, what we are, and why they should stop hunting us." "They won't listen," Sarah said. "Maybe not, but at least they'll know we tried talking before we did something more dramatic." "Abel, I know, Mama. I know it's dangerous. I know it makes me a bigger target, but I'm already a target. At least this way I control the message." Over the next week, Abel wrote. Thomas printed copies on his press, and the network distributed them throughout New York and Philadelphia. The letter was simple, direct, and impossible to ignore. "To the men who hunt us, we are not demons, we are not abominations. We are children, born with gifts we did not ask for, into a world that chains us for the color of our skin and fears us for the power of our minds. You call us unnatural, but what is unnatural about intelligence, about the ability to heal, to create, to remember what you tried to make us forget? What is unnatural about refusing to be less than we are so you can feel superior? We do not seek conflict. We seek only freedom, the same freedom you claim as your birthright. We ask for recognition as human beings, not property. We ask for the right to live without fear, to develop our gifts without persecution. If you continue to hunt us, we will defend ourselves, not with violence unless forced to it, but with truth. We will show the world what we can do. We will prove that every justification for slavery is a lie built on fear. You cannot chain what you cannot understand, and you will never understand us because you refuse to see us as equals. We are rememberers. We are the future your present cannot contain. We will not be silent anymore. The letter caused chaos. The committee denounced it as propaganda. Churches debated its theological implications. Abolitionists celebrated it as proof of their arguments. Slaveholders demanded stronger laws to control the dangerous elements in their enslaved populations. And somewhere in the South, on plantations from Virginia to Louisiana, rememberer children read copies of Abel's letter and felt, perhaps for the first time, that they weren't alone. The war was no longer quiet. The storm was here. Summer arrived in 1791 with oppressive heat and a sense of inevitability. Everyone, committee members, network supporters, rememberers themselves, felt it building, the confrontation that would define everything that came after. The question wasn't whether it would happen, but when and who would survive it. Abel turned 9 that July. Though he looked older, the constant use of his gift had left marks. His eyes held depths that shouldn't exist in childhood, and his hands bore faint scars from controlling flame that wasn't entirely physical. He'd grown taller, leaner, his body burning calories faster than normal, as if his gift consumed him from within. The network had expanded dramatically since the letter. Inspired by Abel's public declaration, more rememberers had emerged from hiding, more sympathetic adults had joined the cause, and safe houses had been established in a dozen cities. But expansion brought vulnerability. The larger they became, the easier it was for the committee to infiltrate, to gather intelligence, to plan a decisive strike. Marcus Holloway had spent months preparing exactly that. He'd failed to capture Abel twice, and those failures had cost him reputation and money. This time would be different. This time, he wouldn't rely on small teams or traps. This time, he'd bring overwhelming force. He'd convince the committee to fund a major operation, 50 men, armed and trained, coordinated strikes on multiple safe houses simultaneously. They would round up every rememberer they could find in a single night, break the network, and deliver Abel to the committee for study that everyone knew meant dissection and death. The attack was planned for August 15th, when most of the network's leadership would be gathered in Philadelphia for a meeting Ezekiel had called to discuss their next moves. Amma sensed the plan 3 days before it was scheduled to happen. She'd been scanning the city's mental landscape when she encountered a mind that radiated cold purpose. Not Holloway himself, but one of his lieutenants, a man named Creed, who was coordinating the New York portion of the attack. From Creed's thoughts, she extracted the date, the targets, the terrifying scope of what the committee planned. "They're going to hit us all at once," she told the assembled network leaders. "New York, Philadelphia, Boston, everywhere we have safe houses. They know where we are, all of us." The room erupted in panic. Voices overlapped, suggestions to scatter immediately, to fight, to flee to Canada, to surrender and hope for mercy. Ezekiel raised his hands for silence. "We can't scatter. If we do, they'll pick us off individually. And we can't surrender. The committee has made it clear they see us as specimens, not people." He looked around the room, meeting each person's eyes. "We have to stand together. Make our stand here in Philadelphia, where this all started." "Stand together and do what?" Thomas asked. "We're shopkeepers and washerwomen, not soldiers. They're bringing 50 armed men." "We have 15 rememberers in the city right now," Ezekiel said. "Another 20 spread across other cities who could be here in 2 days if we send word. The committee thinks numbers and guns will win. They're wrong." "You're talking about open combat," Sarah said quietly. "You're talking about using children as weapons." "I'm talking about defending our lives." Ezekiel's voice was hard. "The committee has decided we're dangerous. Fine. Let's show them their right to be afraid." Abel had been silent throughout the discussion, but now he stood. "Ezekiel's right. We can't keep running. Eventually, we run out of road. But we also can't just react to what they do. We need to change the terms of the fight." "How?" Amma asked. "We make it public. The committee wants to round us up quietly, make us disappear. We don't let them. We force this confrontation into the open in front of witnesses where they can't hide what they're doing. You want to fight them in the streets?" Thomas looked horrified. "That'll start a riot. People will die." "People are already dying," Abel said. "Rememberers who got caught before we could reach them. Slaves beaten to death for showing unusual abilities. My people have been dying for generations. At least this way, we die fighting for something." The debate continued through the night, but gradually Abel's logic won out. They couldn't run forever. They couldn't keep hiding. If the committee wanted war, they'd get war. But on the network's terms, with the world watching. Over the next 2 days, the network mobilized. Rememberers were summoned from distant cities. Supplies were gathered. Thomas and other free blacks who'd supported the cause armed themselves with whatever weapons they could find. Sympathetic Quakers arranged for journalists and observers to be present in Philadelphia on the 15th, promising a significant event without revealing details. Sarah spent those days with Abel, knowing they might be the last quiet hours they'd ever have. She told him stories about his father, about her grandmother in Africa, who'd carried knowledge across the ocean, about the long line of resistance that had led to this moment. "I'm proud of you," she said on the evening of the 14th. "Terrified, but proud. You've become who you were meant to be." "I'm scared too," Abel admitted. "Not of dying. I've made peace with that. I'm scared of failing, of all these people putting their faith in me and me not being strong enough. You're the strongest person I know, baby. Not because of your gift, but because of your heart. You've never let what you can do make you cruel or arrogant. You've stayed human, despite everything trying to make you a monster." They held each other as night fell over Philadelphia. And across the city, other families had similar conversations. Parents with rememberer children, knowing that tomorrow might end everything. The committee's forces arrived at dawn on the 15th. Holloway had coordinated the timing perfectly. Simultaneous raids on 6 safe houses across the city. His men moved quickly, efficiently, breaking down doors, securing buildings, expecting to find sleeping children and panicked adults. Instead, they found empty rooms. The network had abandoned the safe houses during the night, moving everyone to a single location. Independence Square, the open area in front of the State House where the Declaration of Independence had been debated and signed 15 years earlier. As the sun rose, Holloway's men regrouped, confused by the empty safe houses. Then word reached them about the gathering at Independence Square, and Holloway understood. The network wasn't running. They were making a stand. By mid-morning, hundreds of people had gathered in the square. Rememberers stood at the center, 35 children ranging from age 6 to 16, each bearing gifts that defied explanation. Around them stood the network's supporters, free blacks, Quakers, abolitionists, and curious citizens who'd heard rumors of something extraordinary happening. The committee's forces formed a perimeter around the square, 50 armed men facing a crowd that included children. Journalists from 3 newspapers sketched the scene, sensing they were witnessing history. Holloway rode forward on horseback, stopping at the crowd's edge. "This is illegal assembly," he called out. "By the authority of the property laws of Pennsylvania and the Federal Fugitive Slave Act, I'm ordering you to disperse and surrender any runaway slaves." "These aren't slaves," Ezekiel called back. "They're human beings, and they're not leaving." "Then you're all guilty of harboring fugitives." "I have warrants for the arrest of—" Holloway pulled out a paper, reading names. "Abel, son of Sarah. Amma, no last name. Kofi, property of—" "We don't have owners," shouted one of the children. "We're not property." The crowd's energy shifted, anger rising, tension building. Holloway's men tightened their grips on weapons. The journalists kept writing, capturing every word. Abel stepped forward from the group of rememberers. Blue flame flickered to life around his hands, visible even in daylight. "You came here to capture us?" Abel said, his voice carrying across the square with unnatural clarity. "To study us like animals, to prove we're inferior so you can justify keeping my people in chains. But look around you, Mr. Holloway. Look at the people who've come to stand with us. Free and enslaved, black and white, all united by the simple truth that we deserve to live. Deserving doesn't matter, boy. Law matters. And the law says you're property, then the law is wrong." Abel's flame grew brighter. "You've built your nation on words about equality and freedom, but you deny those things to people who look like me. You call it natural order, God's will, scientific fact, whatever lie helps you sleep at night. But we're the proof that your lies are lies. We remember what you tried to make us forget." Around Abel, other rememberers began manifesting their gifts. Irma's eyes glowed as she projected thoughts to the crowd, letting them feel what the rememberers felt. The fear, the hope, the desperate desire just to exist without persecution. Kofi raised his hands, and the mechanical clock on the State House began moving backward, its gears turning in impossible directions. The twins, a Benny and a Dana, spoke in perfect unison, their shared consciousness on full display. The crowd gasped, some in wonder, some in fear. The journalists wrote frantically. "You see," Abel continued, "this is what you're so afraid of. Not violence, not rebellion, potential. We represent the possibility that everything you've been taught about racial hierarchy is wrong. That's why you hunt us. That's why you want us dead." Holloway's face had gone pale. He'd expected a raid, a fight, maybe a few casualties that could be explained away. He hadn't expected a public demonstration, a spectacle that would be reported in newspapers across the country. "You're making this worse," Holloway said. "You could have disappeared, lived quietly. Now you've forced my hand." "No," Abel replied. "You forced ours. We're just refusing to go quietly." Holloway turned to his men. "Take them. All of them." The men advanced, weapons raised. The crowd panicked, people scrambling away from the coming violence, but the rememberers stood firm. What happened next would be debated for decades, reported in conflicting accounts, analyzed by historians and theologians and scientists, all trying to understand what witnesses described. The rememberers joined their gifts. Armor linked their minds, creating a collective consciousness that amplified each child's ability. Abel's blue flame merged with the fire starter's red, creating a barrier of light that no bullet could penetrate. The healer's touch spread to all of them, knitting wounds before they could form. The machine savant synchronized their movements, turning 35 individuals into a single organism moving with perfect coordination. And from that union of gifts came something new, a pulse of energy that radiated outward, touching every person in the square. For a moment, just a heartbeat, but it felt eternal. Everyone present experienced what the rememberers experienced. They felt the middle passage, the chains, the whips, the systematic attempt to destroy a people's identity and replace it with subservience. They felt the loss of names, languages, families, cultures. They felt the violence of slavery in their bones, their souls. And they felt the rememberer's response, memory refusing to be erased, knowledge surviving against all odds, humanity asserting itself despite every attempt to deny it. When the pulse faded, the square was silent. Holloway's men had dropped their weapons, many on their knees, tears streaming down their faces. Citizens who'd been indifferent to slavery suddenly understood its horror, in a way no pamphlet or sermon could convey. Even the journalists had stopped writing, too overwhelmed to capture what they'd experienced. Abel collapsed, the effort of channeling that much power finally too much. Sarah ran to him, cradling her son as blue flame flickered weakly around them. "Did it work?" Abel whispered. "Did they feel it?" "They felt it, baby. Everyone felt it." Holloway struggled to his feet, his face wet with tears he didn't remember shedding. He looked at the rememberers, at the children he'd been hired to capture, and saw something he'd never allowed himself to see before. People. Not property, not specimens, but human beings who'd suffered and survived and deserved dignity. "I can't," Holloway's voice broke. "I can't do this anymore." He turned and walked away, leaving his men and his contract and his old life behind. Several of his men followed. Others stood confused, waiting for orders that would never come. The committee's raid had failed, not because of violence or superior numbers, but because the rememberers had done something the committee never imagined possible. They'd forced their enemies to feel empathy. News of the Independence Square demonstration spread across the country within weeks. The accounts varied wildly. Some called it a miracle, others witchcraft, still others a mass hallucination. But everyone agreed on one thing: something extraordinary had happened, and it had changed the conversation about slavery forever. The committee disbanded quietly, its members scattered by scandal and public outrage. Dr. Pritchard fled to Europe. Professor Whitmore resigned from Harvard and devoted the rest of his life to abolitionist causes. Even Reverend Cole softened his rhetoric, acknowledging that perhaps God's judgment was meant to inspire compassion, not fear. But the battle wasn't over. Slavery didn't end because of one demonstration. If anything, Southern slaveholders became more determined to suppress any hint of unusual abilities in their enslaved populations. The laws that the committee had lobbied for passed in several states, mandating harsh punishment for any slave displaying unnatural talents. Yet the rememberers had achieved something crucial: visibility. People knew they existed now. Abolitionists had undeniable proof that enslaved people possessed intelligence and abilities equal to or exceeding their white counterparts. The scientific justifications for slavery began to crumble under the weight of evidence that no measurement or theory could dismiss. Abel recovered slowly from the demonstration. The collective channeling had nearly killed him. His body bore the cost of amplifying 35 gifts simultaneously. He spent weeks in bed, feverish and weak, while Sarah and the network nursed him back to health. When he finally regained strength, he was different. The boy who'd escaped Charleston at 5 was gone, replaced by something more than human but not quite divine, a bridge between what people were and what they might become. "What happens now?" Amma asked him one evening, as they sat on the roof of Thomas's print shop, watching the sun set over Philadelphia. "We keep fighting," Abel said. "Slavery won't end just because we showed people the truth. But we've planted seeds. In 10 years, 20 years, maybe longer, those seeds will grow. Change will come. Will we live to see it? I don't know. Maybe not, but we'll have helped make it possible. That's enough." Below them, the city went about its evening routine, people lighting lamps, closing shops, gathering with families. Somewhere in that city, rememberer children were growing up, learning to control their gifts, preparing for the long fight ahead. And across the South, on plantations where hope seemed impossible, children were beginning to wake up, to remember, to become. The blue flame that Abel had first manifested in Charleston had become a symbol now, hope burning bright, despite every attempt to extinguish it. People painted it on buildings, carved it on doors, whispered about it in slave quarters as proof that resistance was possible. Abel watched the sunset and thought about his father, who died never knowing his son would become something impossible. He thought about all the rememberers who hadn't survived, the children caught by the committee, the adults killed for protecting them. He thought about the long road ahead, the battles yet to come, the price that would be paid in blood and tears and broken bodies. But he also thought about the future, about a world where children like him could exist without fear, where the color of your skin didn't determine your worth, where gifts were celebrated instead of suppressed. That world didn't exist yet, might not exist for generations, but it would exist. The rememberers would make sure of it. "Tell me a story, Mama," Abel had said once, years ago in Charleston, before he understood what he was. Now he understood. He was the story. Not the whole story, just a chapter, one voice in a chorus that had been singing since the first slave ship crossed the Atlantic. But his chapter mattered. His voice had reached people, and voices, once heard, could never be completely silenced. The stars emerged over Philadelphia, the same stars that had guided runaways north, that had watched over Middle Passage ships, that had shone over African kingdoms before the slavers came, the same stars that would shine long after slavery ended, long after everyone who lived in 1791 had died and become memories themselves. Abel raised his hand, and blue flame danced across his fingers, not destroying, not fighting, just existing. Being. A small light against the darkness, but light nonetheless. Sarah found him there on the roof, later, asleep with his hand still glowing faintly blue. She covered him with a blanket, kissed his forehead, and prayed to ancestors she'd never met that her son would live to see the freedom he was fighting for. The next morning, a letter arrived at Thomas's shop. It was from Ezekiel, writing from a safe house in Canada where several rememberers had relocated. The letter was brief. More are waking. Every week, new reports of children manifesting gifts. The network grows stronger. Your demonstration has inspired hope where there was none. The fight continues. We continue. Stay safe. Stay strong. Remember who you are. Remember what you're fighting for. Remember. Abel read the letter and smiled. Remember, that's what they did. That's what they were. Memory refusing to die, knowledge surviving, humanity persisting despite every attempt to crush it. He folded the letter carefully and added it to a growing collection. Documents, newspaper clippings, drawings that Rememberer children had made. Someday, when this was all over, these papers would tell the story, would prove that they'd existed, fought, mattered. For now, there was work to do, always more work. But for one moment, Abel allowed himself to simply be a 9-year-old boy who could create blue flame, who carried the memories of his ancestors, who'd faced down an army and survived. A slave, they'd called him, a genius, an abomination, impossible. He was all of that and none of it. He was Abel, he was a rememberer, and he was free.